Most people eventually arrive at the same feeling. Not all at once. Slowly. You call customer support because something is clearly wrong, but the person on the other side sounds like they are reading from a script designed to end the conversation as fast as possible. You go to work and realize your manager spends more time protecting metrics than solving problems. You open social media looking for connection, and somehow leave feeling more exhausted than before. At first, these seem like separate frustrations. Different industries, different people, different problems. But after a while, the pattern becomes difficult to ignore. The people inside the system no longer seem aligned with the purpose of the system itself. The teacher optimizes for test scores instead of learning. The recruiter filters resumes instead of finding talent. The platform chases engagement instead of value. And the strange part is that most of these people are not evil. Many are competent. Some even care. But something underneath the system quietly changes their behavior over time. This is where things start to break. You see it most clearly in places that were originally built to help people. Healthcare is one example. Patients want care, time, attention. But the system slowly begins rewarding speed instead. More patients processed, more forms completed, more boxes checked. So doctors spend less time looking at people and more time looking at screens. Not because they stopped caring, but because the structure around them changed. The same thing happens inside companies. A business begins with a simple goal: build something useful, solve a real problem. But as it grows, another layer appears. Quarterly targets, investor expectations, internal politics. Suddenly, the people making decisions are rewarded less for improving the product and more for protecting the system around it. At first, nobody notices. The company still looks successful from the outside. Revenue grows, teams expand, numbers improve. But underneath, incentives begin pulling behavior away from the original mission. This is why so many modern systems feel strangely hollow. They still perform the appearance of their purpose, but internally, they are optimizing for something else. There's a reason this pattern appears everywhere: real estate, media, education, tech companies, governments, different surface, same structure underneath. A principal hires an agent to act on their behalf. That's the simplified version. But over time, the interests of the two begin drifting apart. Imagine hiring a real estate agent to help buy a house. You want the best possible decision. The agent wants the transaction completed quickly. Even a slightly higher commission matters less to them than saving weeks of negotiation time. So, while you are optimizing for long-term outcomes, they are optimizing for efficiency, quietly, almost invisibly. The same thing happens inside corporations. The company may want long-term innovation, but middle managers are often rewarded based on short-term metrics. So risk becomes dangerous. Creativity slows down. Safe decisions spread. Not because the people are irrational, but because incentives shape behavior more reliably than intentions do. This is the uncomfortable part. Most systems do not fail because people suddenly become corrupt. They fail because the reward structure gradually teaches people to prioritize survival inside the system over the purpose of the system itself. At first, incentive structures feel harmless, even logical. Schools need metrics to measure performance. Companies need KPIs to track growth. Platforms need engagement data to improve recommendations. Optimization seems efficient in the beginning, but then something subtle changes. The metric slowly becomes the mission. A school no longer focuses on creating educated students. It focuses on producing higher test scores. A content platform no longer focuses on meaningful content. It focuses on maximizing retention. A company no longer focuses on building great products. It focuses on protecting quarterly performance. The more measurable something becomes, the more systems begin optimizing around the measurement itself. And this is where behavior starts separating from reality. Teachers teach for exams instead of understanding. Creators chase click-through rates instead of insight. Employees protect optics instead of solving problems. The system still appears functional from the outside because the numbers continue moving, but internally, the original purpose is slowly being replaced by metric preservation. This pattern has a name: Goodhart's Law. When a measure becomes a target, it stops being a good measure. The dangerous part is that most people never notice this transition while it's happening, because the system usually becomes more efficient first. Faster decisions, better metrics, more growth, more scale. Everything looks optimized. Then slowly, human behavior begins adapting to the incentives surrounding it, not the stated mission, the actual reward structure. Social media platforms are a clear example. Users say they want meaningful connection, balanced information, useful conversations, but the platform does not directly optimize for meaning. It optimizes for engagement. And outrage is highly engaging. Fear is highly engaging. Conflict is highly engaging. So over time, the system naturally amplifies emotional extremes because emotional extremes produce stronger behavioral signals. This wasn't necessarily planned by a single person sitting in a room. That's what makes these systems difficult to see clearly. Nobody needs to consciously design manipulation when incentives already reward manipulative outcomes automatically. The system evolves toward whatever behavior increases its metrics, even if that behavior slowly damages the people inside it. One of the clearest examples of this happened inside Boeing. For decades, Boeing was known for engineering culture. Safety came first. The company was built around the idea that technical excellence mattered more than short-term financial performance. Engineers held influence. Product quality shaped decisions. Then the incentives changed. Slowly at first. Financial pressure increased. Competition intensified. Shareholder expectations became more aggressive. Over time, leadership priorities shifted away from engineering and toward cost efficiency, speed, and stock performance. The company still talked about safety publicly, but internally, the reward structure had already moved somewhere else. And once that happens, behavior follows. Engineers lose influence. Deadlines become more important than caution. Reporting problems becomes politically dangerous. The system starts filtering information upward based on what leadership wants to hear instead of what leadership needs to know. Then eventually, reality pushes back. Not because one person failed, but because the system itself had drifted too far from its original purpose. This is what makes principal-agent problems dangerous. They usually remain invisible during periods of success. In fact, success often accelerates the distortion because strong performance hides structural weakness underneath. You see the same pattern inside media companies. News organizations originally existed to inform the public. That was the mission. But modern media does not primarily compete for truth anymore. It competes for attention. And attention follows emotion. Calm analysis spreads slowly. Outrage spreads instantly. So over time, the incentive structure quietly reshapes the content itself. Headlines become more aggressive. Stories become more polarized. Complexity disappears because nuance performs poorly inside attention markets. The more platforms optimize for engagement, the more media organizations adapt to survive within those platforms. This is why modern information feels emotionally exhausting. Every part of the system is optimizing for behavioral response, not clarity, not understanding, reaction. And the people inside these institutions are responding rationally to the incentives surrounding them. Journalists chase visibility because visibility determines survival. Platforms push emotionally charged content because emotional volatility increases retention. Advertisers reward scale because scale generates profit. Nobody has to coordinate this intentionally. The system aligns behavior automatically. This is why modern institutions often feel strangely disconnected from their stated values. The mission statement remains the same, but the incentives underneath have already changed. The same thing happens inside corporate life, although people rarely describe it directly. A company usually begins with a small group trying to solve a real problem. In the beginning, usefulness matters. Speed matters. Competence matters. The people closest to reality make decisions quickly because survival depends on it. Then the company grows. More managers appear. More layers appear. More reporting structures appear. And eventually a subtle transition happens. Employees stop optimizing for solving problems and start optimizing for internal safety. Meetings become performance theater. Language becomes more political. Risk becomes dangerous. The more bureaucratic the system becomes, the more survival depends on perception instead of contribution. At first, this feels irrational from the outside. Why would intelligent people waste time protecting optics instead of fixing obvious problems? But inside the system, the behavior makes sense. Promotions depend on visibility. Visibility depends on alignment. Alignment depends on avoiding friction with the hierarchy above you. So slowly, the organization becomes filled with people optimizing for career preservation instead of mission execution. Not because they are stupid, because the incentives trained them to behave that way. This is also why so many people feel emotionally disconnected from modern work, even when they are technically successful. The surface story still sounds correct. Work hard, build skills, create value. But underneath, many systems no longer reward actual value creation consistently. They reward signal management, visibility, political alignment, metric performance. The more people sense this gap between stated purpose and actual incentives, the harder it becomes to feel psychologically connected to the work itself. You begin noticing strange contradictions everywhere. Companies say they care about innovation, but punish failure aggressively. Platforms say they care about creators, but optimize for advertiser safety first. Universities say they value education, but increasingly behave like credential marketplaces. At first, these contradictions feel isolated. Then eventually, a larger pattern emerges. Institutions are often less loyal to their stated mission than to the incentive structures that keep them operational. This is why modern life can feel strangely artificial. You are constantly interacting with systems that present one goal publicly while rewarding another goal internally. And once you start noticing this pattern, it becomes difficult to unsee. The uncomfortable truth is that systems rarely collapse because they are weak. Most systems collapse because they become too optimized for the wrong thing. Rome did not disappear when it was powerless. It expanded until the cost of maintaining expansion became greater than the value expansion created. Social media did not become destructive because it failed to capture attention. It became destructive because it became too effective at capturing attention. Corporations do not decay because they stop growing. Often, they decay because growth itself becomes the central metric around which every other decision bends. This is where systems begin turning against their own purpose. The more successful the metric becomes, the more behavior reorganizes around protecting the metric. And eventually, the metric starts consuming the mission itself. Not immediately, gradually, quietly. Until one day, people inside the system can no longer clearly explain what the system was originally supposed to do in the first place. This is why modern life often feels filled with invisible friction. You apply for jobs and realize nobody is actually reading most applications. The company says it wants great people, but the hiring system optimizes for filtering volume efficiently. So keyword scanners replace human judgment. Safe candidates outperform capable ones. The process becomes optimized for administrative convenience rather than talent discovery. The same thing happens online. Platforms say they want authentic creators, but recommendation systems reward emotional intensity, speed, and constant output. So creators slowly adapt. Titles become more extreme. Opinions become sharper. Nuance disappears because nuance performs poorly inside compressed attention markets. At first, these behaviors look individual. One recruiter, one creator, one manager. But underneath, the same force keeps appearing. Incentives shape behavior more consistently than values do. And once enough people adapt to the incentives, the culture itself starts changing. Not through conspiracy, through repetition, quietly, automatically. This is also why genuinely competent people often become frustrated inside large systems. They enter believing performance is what matters most. Then slowly, they realize performance alone is not enough. Visibility matters. Political positioning matters. Narrative control matters. The more complex the institution becomes, the harder it becomes to directly observe real contribution. So systems begin relying on proxies, metrics, presentations, certifications, reporting structures. And eventually, the proxy becomes more important than reality itself. A worker who appears productive can outperform a worker who actually creates value. A company that looks innovative can outperform one doing meaningful long-term work. A politician who controls attention can outperform one solving difficult problems quietly. This is where institutional trust begins eroding, not because people suddenly become irrational, but because systems increasingly reward the appearance of effectiveness rather than effectiveness itself. Once this transition happens, people start feeling something difficult to describe directly. A low-level sense that reality and representation are separating from each other. The internet accelerated this process dramatically. Before platforms, most systems operated slower. Feedback loops took time. Reputation developed gradually. But modern digital systems compress behavior into measurable signals instantly. Clicks, views, engagement, retention. Every action becomes trackable. And once behavior becomes measurable at scale, systems begin optimizing aggressively around those measurements. This creates strange second-order effects. Content stops competing on depth and starts competing on interruption power. News stops competing on accuracy and starts competing on emotional activation. Even personal identity becomes partially shaped by algorithmic incentives. People learn which versions of themselves generate visibility. Then slowly, they become more like those versions over time. The more online life rewards performance, the more difficult authenticity becomes to maintain, not because people are fake, but because systems reward certain behaviors repeatedly until those behaviors become normalized. This is where principal-agent problems become psychological instead of merely organizational. Eventually, even individuals begin acting as agents for invisible systems they no longer fully understand. And this is why many people today feel trapped inside games they never consciously agreed to play. The rules are rarely stated openly. Nobody tells you directly that visibility matters more than truth, or that metrics matter more than mission, or that perception matters more than contribution. You discover it gradually through experience, through disappointment, through observing which behaviors actually get rewarded in practice. This creates a strange kind of modern exhaustion, not physical exhaustion, cognitive exhaustion. Because navigating modern systems increasingly requires managing layers of invisible incentives at the same time. You are no longer simply trying to do good work. You are trying to survive inside structures optimized around metrics, prediction systems, reputation dynamics, and attention competition. The more connected society becomes, the more abstract the systems governing behavior become. And the more abstract the systems become, the harder it becomes for individuals to feel genuine agency inside them. But understanding this pattern changes the way you see institutions completely. You stop evaluating systems based on their slogans, values, or public messaging. You start looking at incentives instead. What gets rewarded? What gets protected? What gets punished? Because incentives reveal the real structure underneath the narrative. A platform may claim to care about creators. But if outrage consistently outperforms quality, then outrage becomes the true product. A company may claim to value innovation, but if failure destroys careers internally, then risk avoidance becomes the real culture. The system is not broken in the way most people think. In many cases, it is functioning exactly according to its incentive structure. This is the uncomfortable realization underneath the principal-agent problem. Human behavior inside systems is rarely driven by stated ideals alone. It is shaped by survival pressures, reward mechanisms, and measurable outcomes. And once you begin seeing those invisible pressures clearly, modern life starts making far more sense than before.